went in danger. That's the extent of his rejection, that his father probably knew that while looking after this sheep, there's so many dangers he can encounter. It was a place where lions and bears came, but his father didn't care whether he died looking after the sheep. That was to the extent of the rejection. But all things work together for good for them that love God. All things work together for good. Because God turned it around and David became the king. Became the king of Israel. God turned his shame to fame. Turned his sadness into gladness. Turned his mourning into dancing. And you know, I guess that's why David was so appreciative of God, because he realized everything that God had done for him, you know, how God had changed his story and completely turned his life around. Because there was a time he danced so much when they were bringing back the Ark of Covenant. He was dancing so much that he almost tore his clothes off and became naked. And Michal, the daughter that Saul gave to David, was looking at David and saying, look at you, a whole king, why are you disgracing yourself? But David knew why he was dancing before the Lord that way. He knew the gratitude in his heart because he knew how God had changed the story. He knew where he would have been. He knew where he was before. He knew how his life started. He didn't start in the palace. He started in the jungle, looking after sheep. He started in a dangerous place. He started in rejection. He started in sadness. And God brought him to a place where he was the king in the palace, commanding a whole nation. And that's why David had so much gratitude to God, because of the turnaround that God gave him. Because all things work together for the good of them that love God. So God is able to make all things that should work against you to work for you. Things that don't even, you can't even see how you're even going to come out of this situation. There doesn't seem to be any light at the end of the tunnel, but God says, I will make this very situation work in your favor. It's like the story of James Robinson. You know, this is a story that I heard recently. And this was a guy that his mom was raped. He was the product of rape. He was conceived as a result of rape. And naturally, his mom would have probably felt, I don't want to keep this child because of the painful memories associated to the conception of this child. I was forced against my will. I was taken against my will. This guy had no regard for me. He stole something from me. He took what was precious from me. He took me against my will. And to make things worse, he impregnated me and left me with an even deeper scar of the torment and torture that I had to endure. So naturally, she should have wanted to get rid of this child. Naturally, she should have wanted to get rid of this child. Because the child represents possibly the worst day of her life. The day her innocence was taken. The day some guy forced himself on her, violating her body. Probably kicking and screaming, begging him, please leave me alone, don't do this to me. But he continued anyway, raping her and impregnates her. She should have hated that pregnancy so much that she would have wanted to abort it. But she kept that pregnancy. And she kept that baby. And the result of that pregnancy was James Robinson. And who's James Robinson today? He's the same, he's a big time preacher in America, on TV and radio, giving hope to so many people all over the world. Blessing people all over the world. Inspiring people all over the world. Bringing salvation to the lives of many. Helping so many out of poverty and doing things, spreading the gospel, changing lives. things, even rape, to work together for good. Another story I remember is a story that Bill Winston once gave in one of his teachings about a guy that just came out of prison and joined his church. And this guy had no qualification, was an ex-offender. And he began to listen to the teachings in the house of God. He began to listen to Bill Winston's sermons and teachings, and he began to implement the things that he was hearing from the pulpit. And before you knew it, he was able to get himself a job. And after a while, he started his own businesses, and now he has a chain of restaurants making millions a year. But this is the same guy who was an ex-offender that can't read or write. No education, no qualification. Somebody we would term illiterate because he can't read or write. But yet, God was able to turn around his situation. That he's now a business owner, employing people that probably have more education than him. Why? Because all things work together for good. All things work together for good, no matter the situation, no matter the circumstance that you find yourself in or you're going through. All things work together for good. God can make it turn around in your favor. God will make it turn around in your favor. But there are conditions. All things don't work together for good for just anybody. This doesn't apply to anybody, because the condition is for them that love God. Number one. Let's read that passage again. Romans 8:28. It says, read it for me in the King James, please. King James. The same version we read before.
And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose.
To them that love God. To them that love God. All things work together for good for them that love God. Meaning, if you don't love God, it won't work together for your good.
That's why we can be so sure that every detail from our lives of love for God is worked into something good.
We can be so sure that every detail, everything, the key thing being, you must love God. And this is how I'm tying it to this thing that we've been talking about for the past 4 weeks, about observing this first commandment, because I'm discovering that this is what it's all about. This is what it's all about. All things work together for good for them that love God. You must love God. Otherwise, you're going to stay in the pain. Otherwise, the rejection will continue. Otherwise, there will be no turnaround. Otherwise, there will be a life of perpetual sadness. Otherwise, there will be no hope. It only works together for your good when you love God. And how do you love God? With all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. Like we're told in Matthew 22. How do you love God? If this thing is dependent, if the condition is that I love God, and then all the mess in my life can turn around for my good, then how do I love God? I suppose is the question we should be asking ourselves. And the answer to that is in John 14. John chapter 14. Verse 15. It says, if you love me,